Hello, ladies and gentlemen, OmnusIans all. I am OmnusI, here before you once more, in the new year, 2019, to look back at 2018 and go over the games that we played that we enjoyed the most. For this, I am not going to be including video games. Perhaps, if there's any interest, I might do something like that. But these are all going to be mostly role-playing games with a board game here and there that kind of is like a role-playing game. So, these are games that either I myself ran, or Rob ran, or participated in. So, some of them are contextual, and we'll explain all of that as we go. So, without further ado, my top 10 games that I was a part of in 2018. Number 10. I frequently reach out to people who on social media express that they have a game that they're interested in input on. Now, oftentimes this doesn't amount to anything. People are just canvassing and looking for interest, possibly dropping their names to build some buzz, things like that. That's fairly common. But as I do offer some amount of editing and design suggestions and things like that, occasionally I get a person who will send me a copy of their beta or their alpha and ask for my opinion on it, and which I give them. It has gotten me some opportunities to participate in some people's design and to make works a little bit better that I see, although I don't have full editing credits on these. I'm just giving a little bit of help here and there when it's asked for. Number 10 is one such game. You will not find it on the bookshelves. It is still being created, but I was exposed to it, and I find that the game has a fair amount of merit. The game is called Domains, and it's created by a gentleman named Philip Longcar. And it's a modern-day horror game, which, there's quite a few out there. But Philip has a lot of ideas in terms of having mechanics for grappling with an unfathomable horror, the darkness. And in your conflict with the darkness, your characters oftentimes will experience spiritual damage and madness that decays at your character, as well as, of course, the ever-present risk of death. Your characters have several advantages and disadvantages as you go through. Anybody who's played a World of Darkness game, some of the conceits are fairly familiar. He has a good grasp on the genre, and it may be that 2019 is the year that he releases it. I asked if he was interested in editorial contributions, and he's not quite at that point yet. He's still very much in the design. He just rolled out a beta with some changes from the alpha that I first witnessed. There's several interesting concepts, and his mechanics are, well, they're interesting. As I have not had a huge volume of games to explore, this one makes my top 10 list. I have some hopes for it. I think he'll do quite well as long as he invests in decent art and makes a couple of key changes to make the game flow through and be a bit easier to understand. But I would like to acknowledge and highlight his work. I think he may have something good on the horizon. And so that was Domains by Philip Longcar. Number 9. I would feel rather foolish if I didn't throw at least a little bit of love to one of my most expensive children, Massive Darkness. Massive Darkness by Cool Minis or Not, a board game that I kickstarted a year ago. I have had and have now run a few times. My first experience last year was the year that I received it. And it's a solid game. It's a very role-playing light miniatures game where you battle monsters, collect treasures, and work cooperatively with other people. That's where it really shines. You can even run it solo if you want. It can be difficult, but it's doable. The game scales with the number of players, so if you have more people playing, you can leverage more effect against the various enemies that you go up against, but it does take a little bit longer as there are more enemies to chew through. All in all, it's a fun game. I got to play it in public at GameholeCon and had several people who signed up to play it. It was really nice having full groups, and my idea of running 3-hour-long periods with the game really proved to be a good idea. That gave us enough time to run through an entire scenario, and as I had everything laid out, people just picked their characters, picked their classes. The board was all set up and ready to go, and boom, we went into it. The first campaign, went through the entire session, and proved to be a fun bit of work. The second game, the group was very disciplined and focused, and had experience with other cool Mini or Not games. The company does recycle their their gameplay mechanics. I've seen them in a couple of other companies too. So it's almost a public domain conflict resolution game, but for what it's worth, it does work fairly well, and allowed me to tell a good story and entertain some people with being able to participate if I had wanted to. So, all in all, I have nothing really bad to say about the game Massive Darkness itself. The miniatures are very nice. The mechanics are tight enough. There may be a few tweaks and twists that I try at some point, but for the most part, it's well and self-contained. Not a big fan of the manufacturer and some of their practices, especially as far as timeliness goes, but all in all, Master of Darkness is a fairly good game. Number 8. Number 8, it's hard to put it 8. I'd love to put it higher, but quite honestly, there was so little gameplay I really couldn't. The game is Twilight 2000, first edition. The reason that it's on my list is because I got to play a very small amount of a play-by-post game by my own friend, the Fat Man GM, Rick Hilliard. And we set this all up through social media. We had another player, possibly two. The problem was we had a lot of people who said it was a good idea, but in the end, no one really participated. The game master, the Fat Man GM, was he had a great scenario set up. He had graphics for it, a map. I thought he approached it well. He just unfortunately did not have any other players besides myself, who was turning in my action reports. He didn't have other people who were willing to participate, really, is what it came down to. I don't have a lot of sympathy or, quite honestly, a lot of respect for people who say that they are into a play-by-post game and then just flake, who don't turn in turns. It's so little time commitment to play a play-by-post. I do prefer, for some games, play-by-post for that very reason. I don't have a great deal of time to make it for specific scheduled events, but I always have time to at least check a message board, see what's going on, and then post. And the beauty of play-by-post is that for your post, you have the floor. You can write and be as elaborate as you want with what you are doing and how you are going to describe it, which can hang yourself if you make a mistake that can't easily be glossed over. But that's part of it. You really can emote and play out your character. It's an interesting way of going about it. Twilight 2000 is a fairly solid game. The idea is that it's World War III has happened. The nukes have flown, but the world wasn't obliterated. People aren't stuck in vaults or anything like Fallout. Instead, you're part of the army who was not obliterated, and now you're stuck in this world that has, some radioactive craters and stuff, but for the most part, you're just trying to make it, where resources aren't as on demand as they used to be. Finding fuel for your vehicles can be extremely difficult, to the point where you almost have to manufacture it yourself via stills, creating ethanol to try to get your vehicles moving. And having any semblance of military discipline is difficult, but it does give you an edge over the undisciplined mobs you may find yourself against. The game itself, it's a fantastic idea. The fact that we are moved past that quite a ways in the future, chronologically, doesn't really make the alternate history timeline any less compelling, especially since there are some tensions now going with Russia and all the fun with Putin. I think these games could definitely come back if the tension gets more and more into more of a Cold War scenario. Who knows? It's something that nobody really likes to think about. We thought we were done with that, but Twilight 2000 First Edition, a game I really wish would have gone further. I wish we had honestly better players. But maybe someday, if Rick and I will put together something else. Maybe next time I will run something. I have a story in mind, and I would like to run something, but we'll have to see. I'm a little busy right now, but here's being hopeful for the future. Number 7. Number 7 on my list is Swords and Wizardry. Specifically, Swords and Wizardry Light and Swords and Wizardry Continual Light. These are the games that I used when I was running my mega dungeon that I had created for my local gaming store. The Chimerical Dungeon of Fondlach. And the game is now defunct. I'm not running it anymore. I only really had 2 players that showed up every time. It didn't get the mega dungeon-y thing I was kind of hoping for. It wasn't entertaining for me. And, for the times that people did show up, I thought it was quite fun and went well. Swords and Wizardry Light is a retro clone. It's a retro clone of original Dungeons & Dragons, and the Light version pairs it back to the earliest days, where the only die that you roll is a 20-sided die for combat resolution, and everything else is a 6-sided die. Damage, hit dice, everything. Just a d6 takes care of everything else. 4-siders, 8-sided dice, 10-sided dice, not used. There's a certain purity to that. I do like a little bit more detail, and I do love all those extra dice. So it's not my all-time favorite retro clone, but I do have some really good feelings, especially for Light and Continual Light, which were created and adapted by my friend Eric Tenkar Stina, and it's solid. And Swords and Wizardry Light is free. It's available as a free download, so anybody can experience the joy of original Dungeons & Dragons playing. You get a sampling of 20 or so monsters, the core rules on how to make characters for up to 3rd level. There's no reason not to play if you ever had a hankering. It's out there. And Swords and Wizardry Light. Swords and Wizardry Continual Light, which I have, goes from 1st level to 7th level. Gives you a couple of optional classes that work similarly to the core 4 classes from classic role-playing games. Your fighter type, your cleric type, your wizard type, and your thief type. All in all, solid game. If I don't want to run anything too complex, I don't want my players to have all of the options to sort through like 5th edition gives, Swords and Wizardry is certainly an acceptable option. Number 6. At my number 6 spot, I'm going to build one of my own games that I'm running. 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, set in the scenario as outlined in the adventure, Princes of the Apocalypse. Now, I have the original Temple of Elemental Evil, and at least one of my players has run it with me. So the idea of going back to the temple was intriguing. And for my group, it's the first real chance of playing 5th edition. We did a little thing earlier on where I revisited the Age of Worms story path from Dungeon magazine before that was terminated. Thank you, Wizards of the Coast. But Princes of the Apocalypse, what Wizards of the Coast is doing with these hardcover adventure series is not just giving you an adventure that you can run, because quite honestly, the old softcover modules work just fine for that. Now, what I like with these hardcovers is they give you a really nice sandbox to play in. Yes, there's an overriding storyline. Yes, there are a number of NPCs and all the hallmarks of your classic module. But, more to the point, these things let you basically frame the adventure however you want. You have events that can take place at regular intervals. You have the NPCs in place, and everything is laid out for your characters. They come onto the scene and action is ready to happen. But they don't bark over your head exactly what is going to happen. You just know that there's an impending scale, and that as things go on, there is a very flowchart-centric style of the way things run. Do the players want to run off and do a side quest? It doesn't really kill the adventure. Even if there does seem to be an impending, events coming into place, it gives the people running it, both the game players who are dictating the pace by what their characters do, and the game master who's running the game, can either drive events and force the players along the way that they want, or they can let the players have a night off, enjoy themselves, and revel in some camaraderie and some of the other advantages to being an adventurer. Take some time off of your busy night of killing cultists, and let your characters level up, buy some loot, all the fun things about being an adventurer. We've enjoyed it. For the most part, it's a strong adventure. It is not one that will take your characters all the way to level 20. The difficulty does escalate, but it doesn't bring you up to the highest levels, which is fine. It gives you all of the challenge that you need for running characters from low level, first level. Right now my characters are up to 7th to 8th level and doing quite well, getting ready to make some of the attacks on the end game content. And it's been quite exciting. So far they have slain 2 of the leaders of the 4 elemental cults, and they have the others in their sights, so very exciting stuff. I have enjoyed the game. I do like 5th edition. I like what they've done with the edition. Again, if pressed, I will elaborate on those, but as we go through the other series, Character Witness, we're doing Dungeons & Dragons. We'll eventually get through the other editions, including Advanced, 1st edition for many people, 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 4th edition, and 5th edition. And I look forward to highlighting the advantages that 5th edition has. It's a very nice game system and very worthy to inherit the mantle. Number 5. Number 5 will be the other campaign that I am currently running, Warhammer 40,000 Dark Heresy. In this game, the characters are in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, which if you've played the board game, or tabletop board game I should say, actually there's several board games too. It's a franchise that Games Workshop has really kind of grown out and expanded on. No matter what you're interested in, you have some level of hobbyist that you can play in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. There are also several excellent novels, and it has a wonderful, wonderful world to play in. So, of course, what I do is I create my own world and have my players, jump in the world that I created, but within the lore of this Warhammer 40,000 universe. And specifically, they are using the sub-book, the Book of Judgment, which is my number 4 book, because it's very good for what I'm doing. The Book of Judgment highlights the roles, gear, and tactics of the Adeptus Arbites, who are the long arm of the law for the Imperium. They are the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner, a la Judge Dredd. Very, very much inspired by Judge Dredd, I suspect. I don't have any proof. Please don't sue me, Games Workshop, or whoever's in charge of Dredd. But quite honestly, they have all the hallmarks of the Judge Dredd type character, the person who upholds the law and is above the law in many cases, able to execute people breaking the law and trusted to hold themselves to a ridiculously high standard. Even though we know many people are dirty and they won't quite make it to that standard, the Arbites are expected to be that good. However, they are not the kind of people who will blow you away for jaywalking. At least they shouldn't be. They are the ones who worry about high crimes like treason or being in league with the outlaw Xenos races. All of the things that basically kind of try to prop up the crumbling mortar of the Imperium society. The Arbites are the ones who make sure that the big stuff does not get swept under the rug but is punished, and as such, anybody is subject to their rulings from the highest nobles on. It gives them a lot of responsibility, because if they don't do their job, their world can go poof with a press of a button of an Inquisitor or a Space Marine captain whoever wants to execute the exterminatus on the planet and obliterate it. So, yes, they hold themselves to a high standard, and they need to, because that is an omnipresent danger. In this case, the story that I am telling, using the Book of Judgment, has given me some ideas on how I can approach an organization of, this scope. And as such, I took a lot of the materials and promptly threw them out. I wanted to create my own world and create my own challenges for this group. And as such, I created the World of Vigilance, which is a fairly fortunate world that they came upon because the people there are extremely pious. It could very well be a shrine world, as loyal as the people are, even though this world had been cut off from the Imperium. The people there are very pious and devout for their emperor. And as a result, many of them are law-abiding citizens who have no problem working with the Arbites. They don't have any difficulties with them. They don't cause problems. They acknowledge their lot in life is to work and give their service and lives for the emperor, and as such, there's not a huge amount, seemingly, that the Arbites need to worry about. Except the former Arbites who were there before them, they just ended up getting a little bit corrupted, and they basically, their precinct fortress was cut off and overwhelmed and mismanaged and things like that. They found out that there's a litany of sins that their predecessors had accomplished. So they have done a really good job of coming back. It's given a lot of opportunities for the players to develop characters and form bonds within the community and have all of their individual strengths and some weaknesses come to light. Over the course of the full year that we had played, the characters went from shell-shocked and in a ruined ship that had actually punched into the hive that they had been plunged into, to repurposing the precinct fortress for their home and their shelter, getting vehicles, making ties and advances in with the tech priests, who basically have carved the hives up into their fiefdoms, all centered around their manufacturing of interest, what they produce. And well, as a result, they basically run the place. So the group has worked with the cult, the machine cult, to basically rein in lawlessness and keep everything going, and they've done a good job. We are getting close to an end game for that system, so it is one that I'm definitely going to run again at some point if health and life are with me. I think the Warhammer 40,000 universe is fascinating, even if I don't really care much for the war game, the role-playing game, the fluff and everything. Fascinating, and one I would love to play in, not just run. But, well, that's not likely to happen, so we'll run it again sometime soon. Number 4. As I mentioned with number 5, with the Dark Heresy, the Book of Judgment goes in hand with Dark Heresy. Most of what I said for Dark Heresy at number 5 basically also applies quite well to the Book of Judgment. There are some new alternate advances, but most of what was interesting was looking at the different gear that was available, different mechanisms that are in place so that you can, for instance, prosecute an investigation. The differences on how the Arbites go about their business as opposed to law enforcement that you might be familiar with. And goodness knows, for all of the different shows, my wife loves live PD, for instance, watching actual police officers out in the field. You have that exposure if you want it. The Arbites do things a lot differently than they do, and having a book that's a resource that the players can use to illustrate what's punishable, what isn't, how can we go about our business, what is off limits, proved very, very valuable. While Dark Heresy is a brilliantly created book and gives you a lot of leeway on all the different directions that you can go, I wanted to take my game in a completely different direction, and having the Book of Judgment, well, I specifically got it for this campaign. It's that good. And I recommend it for anybody who's interested in expanding out the things that are available in your campaign, especially if you're interested in the Bucketheads, the Adeptus Arbites in your world. Number 3. Number 3 is kind of a tough one because it's a one-and-done game. I played one game of this, but there's a couple of qualifiers that put it so high up on my list. You see, Steve Jackson Games is into the Kickstarter scene as a published game company. They use it to manage their pre-sales. And one of the things that I backed over this last year was Dungeon Fantasy by Steve Jackson Games. Sort of, by proxy. I actually had my game company, my favorite local game store, order me a copy and save it for me, and I got it that way. Which was, it was really nice. Steve Jackson Games, of course, familiar for their, flagship role-playing game GURPS, the generic universal role-play system. I've talked about it on this channel before. It's one of my favorites. Dungeon Fantasy basically takes all of the myriad options for GURPS and distills it for only the ones that are appropriate for your fantasy scenario. So magic and things are going to take the precedence. Medieval weapons, things like that. Medieval armor, having a more complete set and a more detailed list of rules that brings it closer in line to Dungeons and Dragons. Quick and dirty rule sets so that you can, with a finite number of rules and options, run just about anything you can imagine in fantasy. As a platform, it's solid. As a resource, it's decent. I mean, I have so much for, Dungeons and Dragons and that. I have tons of resource. Adapting it to a completely different system, little tricky if you don't understand the game mechanics behind them. But, quite honestly, it's still one of my favorite systems. Now, as I said, I have participated in this. I went to GameholeCon, and I got a chance to play the Dungeon Fantasy game, Lost Halls of Tyr, which was written by Douglas Cole, who, a nice guy, really glad I've met him. I met him through the social site 10 Cars Tavern, again, with my friend Eric Stina. And he is a passionate role-play game enthusiast. I first encountered him, got excited about his project Dungeon Grappling, which is a good resource for the people who want to do a little extra work and have a little bit more realistic detail with their fantasy role-playing game of choice. He has several in there, and it works. It's solid. Little extra work for the game master, little bit of extra numbers to keep track of for the players. But if you are going to have somebody who really wants to be able to grab people and rend your opponents with your hands, it is, in my mind, the ideal work for that. It's based on realism. It's based on a decent understanding of combat. Doug is good at this. So with a very successful Kickstarter that launched that, he had his Lost Halls of Tyr, which he put out. He also has his Dragon Heresy role-playing game, which is extremely high quality, very good 5th edition-like game using the Open Gaming license. He made a fantastic book. Quite honestly, if it's just a matter of exposure that he isn't considered to be one of the best, in the business for his high level of detail and really good materials, the amount of research he does. And okay, this is not going to be a fan thing for Doug. However, I got to play his adventure with him at GameholeCon using the game system that I really do love, Dungeon Fantasy, and it felt really good. Really, really good. I love GURPS in that it's realistic, but it lets you do exactly what you want to do. And he let us tell a story about Viking heroes. Not superheroes, but solid. I mean, I played a young Conan with massive thews and a relic sword and a masterful axe and just cleaving through undead minions, and it felt really good. And protecting my party and all of the good things. It's just, you can't quite replicate the feel of knowing you have a finite number of hit points and, going out bare-chested into the wilderness, because my character didn't have nearly enough armor for what I wanted to do, and still making it work. Your defenses and tactics and things are important for, the game. And he gave me a superhero melee combat person. Everybody in the group was good, but my character had was really powerful. And it was fun. It just, the undead came, and it was like, yes, we'll fight our enemies, and even if it be a fearful battle, we may fall, but we'll be in Valhalla together. And it was a glorious thing. Doug is a good game master. He's really familiar with his own rules, and I kind of want to do that again using his Dragon Heresy rules that he's probably the most familiar with. But he did a serviceable job for Dungeon Fantasy, and it was fun. I enjoyed it a lot, and that's why it made number 3 of my game experiences of the prior year. Number 2. Celebrity is a wonderful thing. If it's working for you, it can open up doors that you otherwise might never get to. And it's nice to have a little notoriety for the good things that you do. I try not to be a huge, ridiculous, gaping fanboy for, the occasional person that I consider to be a celebrity for my interests and hobbies. But I'm only human after all. At Gamehole Con, there were a bunch of people who were there who were VIPs. Not really possible to rub shoulders with a lot of them, as their presence was very curated and they were bound to certain events and things. So I never got to see Patrick Rothfuss, for instance, or a lot of the VIPs that were there, but I just didn't make it to those events because I had a lot that I was doing myself. I ran 14 hours of games at the con, and I just enjoyed soaking in all of that time with the people that I was able to chat with, spending long times talking with the fine folks over at the Frog God Games booth, or Terry Pavlett, the artist extraordinaire. It was a great convention. However, one nod that I did take through unbelievable chance, there was an open chair at Stefan Picorni's table. Stefan Picorni is, of course, the head sculptor, kind of the head of Dwarven Forge, the company that makes some of the finest 3D dungeoning materials available. I've backed a couple of their Kickstarters, and I absolutely love my Dwarven Forge dungeon sets. However, the guy himself is a force of personality. He's manic in his enthusiasm for role-playing games, which is awesome to see in practice. And I got a chance to. He runs his own kind of a first edition, slightly second edition meld. It's not entirely house ruled. Anybody who's played first or second edition will feel comfortable with the rules that he had. Pre-generated characters, all playing in his world of Valoria. Now, going to an old school game, as opposed to the more modern games that I've been playing lately, was a little bit of a shock. But, I'm flexible. I picked up a magic user and was ready to go. Of course, playing a magic user at first level in, old school D&D, I had my spell and that was about it. But you have to, figure out ways that you can be useful. We had a madcap adventure where at first we were conscripted by an adventurer to go and punish some bugbears that had opened up a tribe, only to find out that the bugbears had sued for peace with the local governance, and they were off limits. We couldn't hunt them anymore. So instead we changed to lizard men in a marsh. Not sure exactly why things went that way, but it was interesting just to show the world is a little bit more living and breathing, I guess. It worked. The main character, who an NPC that Stefan kind of forgot about after a while, was kind of leading our little expedition. And almost a full crowd, we got together and basically a bug hunt. We first ran across a troll, Bob the Troll, who Stefan is just so crazy. He had this pink wig, and he just got into character with his high-pitched voice. And, "I'm Bob the Troll!" But Bob was also, he had a truce with the government, so we weren't supposed to fight him. He wasn't supposed to fight us. But he told us about this evil witch that was in charge of the lizard folk, and so we had Bob agree with us that we should go and take out the witch, which we could do. And we had a troll in the group suddenly. So, we went in and we attacked, and we sent Bob in first, and Bob soaked arrows so that we could get in under cover of the tower, and we got in and killed a lot of lizard men. tactics were a difficult thing because our fighter types didn't always work together, but we got in. Again, we were playing old school D&D, so you had to strike hard and be prepared for whatever you could. We didn't have any real healers in the group, but everybody had a little bit of magic. I had a potion of giant strength, which I was going to save for the end, and we all had things to do. We had our moments of glory. My moments of glory were mostly keeping people alive. When people were knocked down, he let people hang on at death's door for a -10 count and bleeding after you're knocked unconscious. So I spent my time going around and bandaging people up because he ran a brutal game. It was tough. It seemed like we were not going to make it, except for the fact we had a troll on our side who could regenerate. And regeneration is huge in Dungeons and Dragons. So, he honestly went and did a lot of the tank work for us, and our fighters were exceptional fighters who went in and also fought. Most of them had magical weapons by this time. But we did well until at the end we got to fight this witch. And the witch was a nasty customer, a powerful spellcaster who knocked down most of our group with a fireball, and we're first level. So, it was hard. It was a brutal fight. We ended up a lot of Bob ended up attacking her, and the rest of us attacked her, and then she tried to get Bob to switch to her side, and all of a sudden it became very ugly. If a troll and the witch were both fighting our group, half of which were down, we weren't going to survive this. But at a con game, there's no guarantee that you're going to survive this. He's not trying to tell an ongoing story and doesn't value those characters for their contribution to the story. It would just been a group of adventurers that went off and died and didn't come back to civilization. So one of our players made this pitch to it was a kid enjoying his moment in the spotlight, and made his pitch for Bob to join us. And Bob, one of the characters had died, so his player got to play Bob, and he sided with us and then attacked the witch, sort of. The witch shape changed and flew away, and she got away, which was unfortunate. We did get to loot the place, and one of the classy things with Stefan, I thought, it's nice to have your own company that it must be doing fairly well or something like that. He did the display was all done in his 3D dungeoning, which looked very nice. And in the end, the actual treasure that we found were actual prop coins that we were given, actual metal prop coins from his world, which I thought was really nice. So I added them to my collection. So now I've got Valorian coins in my collection, which is cool. Stefan is real. He's not one of these guys who puts on airs. He's just a manic ball of energy that if he's playing a game that you're enjoying, you're going to enjoy it with, because he's not going to hold back. His characterizations are through the roof. From doffing a grotty old chainmail hauberk for playing his guards, and the wig for Bob, and just playing so over the top. He's fun, and I had a blast. And it was nice to reconnect with that old school style that I don't really use very much anymore, and play, on the knife edge of things that, it's fun to go back and do different styles, and I had fun with it. I really did. And, I thanked Stefan for it, and it was fun to play with him. He's a good game master again, very good. I enjoyed it. And I hope to do it again sometime. Number 1. Nepotism in gaming is nothing new. I mean, the very first 2 people who played Dungeons and Dragons for the most part was Gary Gygax and his son, Ernie. And Ernie was an important part of the Dungeons and Dragons universe for some time, making some of the most prevalent characters and having his own input in the game world. Well, last year was the year that I debuted my baby, which is my role-playing game, The Traveling Hat Club. No, I'm not saying because it's my number 1 that it's the best game that I've run. It certainly wasn't. It was all of those things about putting your child out for display in front of everyone else. It was nerve-wracking. It was thrilling. It wasn't my best game, to be honest. And my players, I didn't get a sense that they were awestruck or amazed, or I think they had fun. And, I sent them off with a copy of the game rules, a one sheet with the adventure that we ran on the back. And, for the most part, yeah, it was a good play test. I had fun doing it. But why it was number one for me is because of its significance. It's something that I wholly was responsible for. The rules, the execution, the props, and people paid money to come and play my game, which is, the money went to charity. All the money for Gamehole Con, anything they raise goes on to Child's Play, which is awesome. But people wanted to play my game, That's a dream of mine, to make something that people want. And when I get the Traveling Hat Club out, it'll be pay what you will. I don't expect to make a penny off of it. It'd be nice, but it's not necessary, and it's not what I expect. My expectations are quite low. But as long as somebody gets it and enjoys it and has a chance, I don't even want my game to be anyone's go-to. It's a good introductory game. It's a good game to bring your kids into, or an emergency game that anybody can play. If you have 10 coins in your pocket, you can play my game. That's all it really needs to be. It's not the greatest game in the world, and it's not going to be, I don't really believe, anybody's go-to. But it fits in nicely with the rules-light kind of games that a lot of people are interested in, where your game master can literally do anything, and the rules are flexible, and you can do whatever you can imagine, really. I'm not going to champion my game here before you, but my experience is running my own game for complete strangers that they wanted to play and paid for. That made it my number one. It was special. It had a special moment that I will remember forever, as long as my memory holds, of people who played my game. So that was my number one gaming experience. It was a good year. There was a lot of good things that happened. I've got a stable gaming group, telling some good games. I've had some other experiences through the year that was fun. I ran a game of Kobolds Ate My Baby. That was fun. I've picked up a lot of new board games that I, can't wait to play. I've seen, new games come in development, and some that I'm actually really excited about. I don't enlarge my gaming library very often. Mostly I'm looking for relics of the past that I missed that I've been trying to get back into. Thank you, Half-Life Bookstore, for taking my money, but I've got a lot of good things to show for it. But it's still, I will still hold. And please forgive me if you're getting tired of hearing me say this, but it is the golden age of role-playing games. Anybody can make one. And there's so many good ideas going out. And there are so many people who are getting into the industry and getting into the hobby that my hope is that there eventually comes a time when nobody will feel like they can't do the role-playing game that they want to do because there's nobody around who's interested. Maybe that'll never happen. I don't know. It seems like with games like Roll20 and, Fantasy Grounds and stuff like that, that those lines are vanishing. I know that's still not practical for everyone, but it would be really nice for 2019 for us to take some leaps and strides and more people to get into the hobby and eventually get to the point where every community has at least an avid group who enjoys playing these games together. And, God willing, if any of you out there see this and you think to yourself, this guy's, thinking wishfully and I haven't played in years, or there's nobody around here who's interested, well, maybe. But if you steer a few people towards, sites like, well, Lair of OmnusI, but also, introduce them to shows like Stranger Things, Let's Plays like Critical Role. Exposure a lot of times can show people that these games are a fun hobby. Lets you do all kinds of things that you'd never ordinarily be able to do, and you can be the hero without being told exactly what to do, and find your own way to save the world, or just go across the road and get a cheese sandwich, whatever you want. So, I am OmnusI here. That has been my top 10 games that I have played this year. Thank you for joining me as always, and we'll be coming at you with more content very soon. Thank you, and may 2019 be a wonderful year for you, with all the gaming that you can handle, or all the gaming that you would wish to. Thank you, and farewell.